Hi, I am Carlos Castellanos, and I'm going to discuss how artists, through the unique material speculations that the arts makes possible, are exploring alternative models of intelligence, cognition, sentience, via work that features primitive organisms, microorganisms such as bacteria. And in doing so, I'm presenting, sort of showcasing possibilities for a new kind of art science, a possible rethinking of the relationships between art and science. And I'll talk about it. I'll sort of present a kind of cybernetic framework to sort of frame everything. So first, let me start off with a quote, which is where the title of this talk comes from. So this is from James Shapiro, a biologist who is sort of a leading figure in bacterial intelligence. The recognition of sophisticated information processing capacities in prokaryotic cells represents another step away from the anthropocentric view of the universe that dominated pre-scientific thinking. Not only are we no longer at the physical center of the universe, our status as the only sentient beings on the planet is dissolving as we learn more about how smart even the smallest living cells can be. So that's James Shapiro talking about bacteria, essentially. And so that idea that, until recently, the idea that, cognition was sort of limited to humans, right? It was thought of as a uniquely human trait. But now, still controversial, but the idea of bacterial cognition, intelligence, and sentience is becoming more widely accepted. And there's more and more research being done in this area. Like we've probably heard of like the slime mold Physarum polycephalum, used to model subways and highway networks, solve mazes, all that kind of thing, while being devoid of any nervous system or neurons, and certainly no brain. The pattern-forming bacteria that you see on the big image here on the left. This is Pan-Bacillus dendritiformis, the chiral morphotype. They exhibit extraordinary sort of collective behavior and intelligence, and these interesting patterns in response to environmental conditions. We also have plant root logic gates, and other experiments with plants and slime molds, for computational substrates. This is being done by people like Andrew Adamatsky in the UK. So they're challenging, again, notions of intelligence and cognition, sentience, even creativity. And it's a kind of a complex adaptive systems view of intelligence and of life, right? More of a focus on adaptive relationships with the environment. And this idea that living organisms, they establish these complex, informational linkages with the environment. So we can think of this as, there's sort of a contradiction here, right? There's kind of contrasting ontological visions, right? So Andrew Pickering, who I believe takes the term from Bruno Latour, this idea of modern science versus non-modern, right? So modern is, kind of the day-to-day science that we know, and that is, the day-to-day science. It's dualist, it's reductionist. The non-modern is holistic. The modern sort of works from the idea that the world is knowable. Non-modern, the world is unknowable and exceedingly complex. We generate knowledge through detached observation versus non-modern generating knowledge through interaction. On and on, right? We can go further in specific fields. We see it in the difference between AI, traditional AI, and second-order cybernetics, which I'll talk about a little bit. Classical mathematics versus complexity theory, and maybe even engineering and the arts, right? So that's sort of the contradiction I sort of want to focus on a little bit here. And how artists are sort of generating these kind of artifacts and systems and different ontological models for this sort of non-modern approach. And to a certain extent, we have there's been some work in this, like Philip Galanter's model of complexism, which is kind of a feel like a sort of third way between the science wars, right, of modernism versus postmodernism. But what I want to look at is more specifically the relationships with primitive non-human, quote unquote, primitive non-humans, and how this stuff is actually threaded through practice. Like, how does it look like when artists make these things and work with like I said, these primitive organisms, but the ones that are very much not like us, right? Like they don't have their models of intelligence and learning are very different than what we associate. I think a good place to start is cyberneticist Gordon Pass. He had this idea of a participant observer versus a scientific observer, or sometimes the participant observer, he called it a cybernetic observer. So what he says is a participant observer decides upon a move which will modify the assemblage and in general favor his interaction with it. So that's what he's saying. We generate knowledge through interacting with something, which you're not supposed to do in science, right? You're supposed to have this detached, not supposed to influence the thing you're studying. But he was trying to account for that, for essentially subjectivity, right? So it's not unlike artists, who understand their materials through interacting with them, right? So this is his sort of non-modern cybernetic method of maximizing interaction with an observed system. So it's a constructivist, view of knowledge, right? And he did some concrete, experiments, most notably his electrochemical experiments. There's not a lot of time to go in them, but basically, these things were able to learn aspects of their environment. He was able to steer them without being specifically designed to learn aspects of the environment, right? So he had these electrochemical solutions that you put a current in, and it grows these kind of metallic threads. And they were able to, like I said, learn aspects of the environment. I'm going to skip this quote, but you can pause the video and read it. It sort of kind of captures his kind of sort of view of the world. So as Andrew Pickering says, this is an ontology of becoming, and his works function as ontological theater, right? Little sort of models of how the world really is, right? Instead of this fully knowable place, we have this that sharp Cartesian divide gives way to ones where humans, non-humans, the environment all exist in this kind of co-emergent interplay. So what I'm asking is how, in what ways are artists working with primitive living organisms to create these experiences that suggest this alternative ontological visions, right? And understanding and acting in the more than human world. And in doing so, how are they laying the groundwork for a new kind of art science? So very quickly, I'll start with this work by Interspecifics, where they're taking a swarming bacteria and tracking it with an AI-powered microscope and using it to generate a sound score. Right. So this is the system diagram. Yes, I know it's all in Spanish, but it's basically. Let me move the cursor here. There's an AI, some cameras tracking the bacteria. They recognize the patterns and they generate audio-visual score, and the AI model then also uses it to kind of maintain and alter the bacterial environment. And this idea here is, again, this kind of machine biology interaction as a way for these organisms to again, it's a performative view. They possess their own performativity, and they're creating this kind of interface through which the unique complexity and otherness of these bacteria can sort of be translated into sort of human sensory ratios. This is a piece by Andy Gracie, where it's kind of hard to tell from the image, but basically there's bacteria in this kind of floating azola. They have this symbiotic relationship with a cyanobacteria. And then he's got a virtual simulated bacteria, and they essentially interact and influence each other. Omegas by Chaine1 is working with leafcutter ants that have this interesting stridulation behavior. So he's tracking that and tracking their movement and using it to sort of power these record players that then scratch. And he refers to this as a kind of autopoietic machine, a cybernetic system. So what can we sort of get out of this? Well, I think there's what sort of binds these together is, yes, the behavior is not determined in advance. They thematize emergence and self-organization. It's a time-based piece in that sense, these works, they're time-based pieces. And the primary vehicle for that emergence is living organisms. So it's less about expression and more about experimentation, right? And I'll talk about about experiment in a second. So we might think of the implications. I'll skip most of this. You can again pause the video and read it. But as Pickering says, the quote at the bottom here, you can construct a canon of contemporary art that draws on science and technology, while as its substrate and but in its products, it radically subverts the ontological premises of modern science and engineering. And Pickering alludes to this as well, as we can sort of rethink the notion of experiment. Let me finish with a very crude model of multi-species computer interaction, which is a kind of non-anthropocentric design framework that investigates the viability of interactions with non-human organisms as vehicles for creative expression. So again, I won't read all of this, but it's sort of a framework for how you might do kind of art science experiments. And there's these three major components, right? Living behaviors, protocols and platforms, essentially, making tools and developing methods and design strategies, and then building actual systems. And I'll just mention very briefly that I'm working on a piece myself with a couple of colleagues, Bello Bello and Johnny DeBlasi, who might actually be here, looking at integrating pattern-forming bacteria and an AI model with a deep learning model with a model of beauty. So I'll leave it at that, and we can discuss that in the Q&A. All right, thanks.
Hey, hi everybody. Elizabeth Desmarais here. Welcome to Trans-Species Collaboration and the New Media. And I'm going to hop into presenter view right now. There we go. So hi everyone. I'm an artist who's interested in the interface between the built and the natural environment. The artworks that I make often take place in the framework of a biotope, which is a small environment shared by multiple species that's often also inhabited by humans. The works may also involve the concept of trans-species giving, which is the idea that the commonalities that exist between life forms are such that we might be able to give another life form a hand up, regardless of how hamstrung we may be by our own culture's interactions with the natural world. So lastly, I find that some of this work also tends to be situated in the space of non-anthropocentric design, which is design that attempts to consider the aims, desires, and perceptual landscapes of the non-human. So I'm going to quickly talk about three pieces. The first work involves fabricating alternative forms of housing for hermit crabs. Another involves designing feeding stations for malnourished urban ant populations that live in places such as these, which is the grassy median between streets and cities. And lastly, I'm also going to talk about floorboards. A floorboard is a term I coined that refers to entities that are part plant and part robot. Although these works are fairly rooted in the visual language of fine art, they're also examples of art-sci collaboration, as all of them employ the tools of theoretical and or applied science. So in this recorded talk, and hopefully in our ensuing discussion, I'd like to consider three things, or I'd like to have your help with three things. The first is the way that ethics may inform these works. The second is the ways that my motivation as an artist to make these works may be different than that of other researchers. And third, I'm going to talk a little bit about how my takeaway from these works may differ than that of a scientist. So in terms of motivation, much of my work comes from a desire to understand my own culture's interactions with the natural world. Initially, my thoughts on this subject were informed by this book, which is Beyond Geography, The Western Spirit Against the Wilderness by Frederick Turner. In this text, Turner argues that the root of our desire to control nature is a set of cultural and religious beliefs found primarily in the Western Hemisphere that separate the mind from the body. He argues that this dislocation has led to a spiritual vacuum in Europe, which in turn led first to the Crusades and then to the colonization of the New World. Later, the writings of Michel Foucault introduced me to the concept of external and internalized forms of control. And as an aside, also the conception of science and absolute knowledge as historically contingent. So a desire to reframe my own interactions with the natural world led me to this, which is my first work in the space of non-anthropocentric design. It's titled The Hand Up Project, Attempting to Meet the New Needs of Natural Life Forms. This project designs alternative forms of housing for land hermit crabs. And these are the small terrestrial crabs whose bodies only produce a thin exoskeleton. So they have to adopt the shells produced by marine gastropods in order to remain housed and protected from predators. Interestingly enough, Amy Youngs, who's also on our panel, has also done work in hermit crab housing design. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But this stands to reason because the problem is huge. There are currently not enough shells left on our beaches for this life form to use. The problem is so bad that biologists routinely find them living in glass jars, empty bottle caps, and basically anything that they can get their pincers on in order to remain housed and protected from predators. What I found interesting about this problem was that because hermit crabs exhibit choosing type behavior, biologists have actually been able to identify the features that crabs find most desirable when choosing dwellings. And what they favor are forms that have a high internal space to weight ratio. So using the earliest version of AutoCAD, I designed alternative forms of housing that eliminate the heavy spool of calcium carbonate at the center of a typical univalve shell, and produced this new form of housing using an early version of stereolithography. So upon its debut, the designs were a great success. 25% of the initial crab population chose to move into a new fabricated home when presented with the novel structures over a 2-month exhibition period at the University Art Museum, the project was part of my MFA show. So because the houses were very expensive, the project also proposed to solicit corporate sponsorship. In exchange for financial support, the Hand Up Project proposed to place a corporate logo on each fabricated form before placing the shelter back into the wild for the animal to use. The other problem, however, for me were the crabs themselves. They had come from a large pet store in Berkeley, California, which kindly taught me how to care for them. But it was really like having a lot of really persnickety house guests in my studio, basically it was 3 months in my studio and then 2 months in the museum. And they were really difficult. One would only eat ripe mango. Another one would only eat chopped up frozen goldfish. They all had individual likes, dislikes, and habits. And like I said, they were all in my studio for 3 months. After they were in my studio, I moved them to the art museum with the new shells for a period of 2 months. And while they were with me, myself and my studio mates would have these long discussions about what was going to happen after the end of the exhibition. I actually had a residency out in New York, and at the end of the exhibition, I had promised the crabs that we were all going to take a car ride across country, and I was going to stop in Florida first and let them free out in one of the beautiful state parks in Florida. Unfortunately, the officials in the state parks in Florida let me know in no uncertain terms that my crabs were of, how did they put it, indeterminate origin. They didn't know where they came from, and no, I couldn't set them free. So at the end of the exhibition, I basically had to get them all out of their new homes and into traditional univalve shells, and then I took them back to the pet store. This was, it was a little traumatizing for me, frankly, and I suspect perhaps also for my collaborators. So keep that in mind as we get to the end. The next project I want to talk about is called the Indiplant Project, an Act of Trans-Species Giving. This was started back in 2012, and the work involves creating robotic supports for potted plants, which allow plants to move freely in a domestic space in search of sunlight and water. The project is an homage to the work of Valentino Brattenberg, who was an Australian Italian cyberneticist who, through a series of thought experiments, basically designed these things called Brattenberg vehicles, which were vehicles that, through a series of simple avoidance or attraction, would actually exhibit what appeared to be very complex kinds of behavior. So the project has basically successfully created, let's see if I can get the video to run, let's see if it runs or not. Oh, it's not running. So the project has basically successfully created a community of floorborgs, and these entities are AI supported. They roll around in the engineering buildings, seeking sunlight and water in accordance with the species of the plant they support. When they need water, they go and they find a little watering station, and there's a big sign on the watering station that says, "If an indiplant is in the vicinity, please give it a drink." So this project has actually led to all kinds of research. This is a transpiration collector that I was designing so that the plants could potentially water themselves. Transpired water is the byproduct of photosynthesis that comes out under plant leaves. This is Ahmed Egamal, who's now part of the Art and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, which is a platform for the creative use of computer vision and machine learning and art. And here, he's writing an algorithm so that the plants can recognize when other plants are wilted, when the other floorborgs are wilted or might be in need of attention or care. And lastly, we designed this huge NSF grant to create a cyber-physical interface that functions as a conduit to signal and digitize information about environmental perturbations from plant to machine. Surprisingly enough, back in 2013, nobody had done research on this kind of signaling. Our grant was favorably reviewed, but ultimately we didn't get the funding because basically zero foundational research existed in plant signaling at the time that we wrote the grant, unfortunately. So the last piece that I kind of want to talk about briefly is a project that's called Communum Spaces. And this project is dedicated to designing community feeding stations for malnourished urban ants that live on grassy medians, such as this one. Still in its infancy, the project is based upon the research of Dr. Amy Savage, who has found that urban median-dwelling ants have to rely on something called bonanza food sources. And these are the high sugar, high carbohydrate foods that humans drop or discard. These particular ants in urban settings turn out to be much more aggressive than the country-dwelling members of the same species. These city-dwelling ants are so starved for protein and healthy fats that they'll attack and eat almost every other kind of eco-supporting insect in their immediate vicinity. So this project is aimed at creating sites that allow humans living in the vicinity of an urban colony to augment the ants' diet with natural forms of protein and fat. The project even proposes an ant feeding app so that participating humans can record and share what foods the ants have eaten each day. So that's the last project I'm going to talk about. And now I'd like to go to really three questions that I sort of started with. And I hope we're going to maybe discuss in our discussion perhaps. The first is ethics. Because of the Hermit Crab Project and a couple of other projects I have done, I now only collaborate with other life forms that have free agency. Birds that come to listening stations, ants that might partake out in the big wide world, hermit crabs that find shells on the beach. If this can't be established, that they have free agency, which might be the case of, say, a plant or a microorganism, I've decided that the project needs to expand the agency, capacity, or habitat of the life form. So that's kind of where I am with ethics. I would love to have your input. I would love to have a little more guidance, especially in the space of microorganisms. So I'm really hoping that you guys are going to come through and you may have some thoughts on this. Then the next thing I want to address is motivation. The creation of factual knowledge is extremely important. However, the knowledge that I've gained is more akin to the kinds of knowledge one gains in a friendship. I find myself learning and appreciating the idiosyncrasies of the guests in my studio rather than identifying generalities. And then lastly, in terms of the information, from when one seeks information from a non-anthropocentric perspective, one may find out non-anthropocentric kinds of information. When we began recording root-to-leaf electrical potentials in the floorboards in the face of environmental perturbations, what we got looked like variation between individuals rather than classes or species. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm very curious to see what you guys all have to say or think, and what the other folks on the panel have to share. And I look forward to speaking with you in our discussion section. Bye, everyone.
We may think of the self as an individual. In reality, we are a multi-species community made from trillions of human cells, symbiotically intertwined with trillions of bacterial, fungal, and viral microbes. All of these have a common ancestor. We, along with other species, water, light, earth, air, and atmosphere, come to form a holobionte, a complex and dynamic ecosystem composed of hologenomes, us, and other associated genomes interacting and co-evolving constantly. This Scatter Surge art and science installation celebrates our symbiotic connections to microbial life living in and on us, the material nature of that life, and the new forms of algorithmic life. When you enter the installation, infrared-triggered microprocessors switch on whisper fans to propel the mobiles forward and collect your skin microbiota. The mobiles, constructed with branches and stones, support the rocks and microbe collection units. Growing on the branches is lichen, itself a fungus symbiotically joined with algae, as researched by Dr. Lynn Margulis. As they spin, fans suck your human skin microflora through a paper filter placed on plexiglass masks, cut in the shape of pluripotent stem cells. These skin cells can be turned into embryonic stem cells and then turned into any other cell type, such as heart, lung, brain, or eye. microbe samples collected on the paper filter during the run of the installation are grown in liquid agar as holobiome snapshots. They reveal varieties of symbiotic bacteria and fungi living with participants who enter and interact with the works. Although Staphylococcus and Corynebacterium are common, there are about 1,000 species known to live on our skin. The installation celebrates and draws attention to the fact that human, bacterial, and fungal cells are descendants of early bacteria. This work asks further questions about the relationship between microbes that reside in and on us, cellular tuning and health, and their evolution and connection to our material planet. Stones are a prominent element in this installation, serving as counterweights to the mobiles and the hanging rocks referencing gravity, the formation of planets, and the mineral and material substrates involved in the origins of early life. The essential amino acids of our bodies have their origins in the elements of these same rocks and stones. The unique properties of rocks that allowed life to emerge have now been exploited by humans with technological advances, as silica has become silicon. While humans benefit as host to all those acquired genes of those who came before and are symbiotically intertwined with us now, silicon and algorithm present new possibilities for obtaining and manipulating memes, and a more integrated human, machine, fungal, and bacterial hybrid is emerging. CRISPR-Cas9, the trick where bacteria use genetic scissors to snip DNA, has been discovered by humans. These accurate DNA scissors unify with silicon-based bioinformatics and allow us, by design, to rejoin and further integrate all the beneficial DNA and genomes of our microbial forebears.
Perhaps one of the greatest tragedies of our time is the recent realization that we are in the middle of an insect apocalypse, resulting from industrialized farming, habitat loss, global warming, deforestation, and synthetic pesticide use. 73 separate studies estimate that insects have declined by 41% since scientists have been tracking their populations. In 2017, a 27-year-long population monitoring study revealed a 76% decline in flying insects alone. Insects are disappearing by 2.5% yearly, and 40% of insect species are near extinction. As insects comprise the base of the food chain for other species, such as birds, this is a truly global tragedy that has implications for the food chain beyond human food systems. For humans, 3/4 of our crops depend on insect pollination. Living isopods, or pill bugs, are voicing this tragedy through their activities in this biorobotic artwork, The Opera for Dying Insects. The opera remix is composed as they slowly eat, deconstruct, and reproduce in their green vitrine, a protected paradise of moist mosses. The isopod's movements are sensed with AI software, and the video is analyzed to determine their location, number, and speed of movement. As music evokes deep emotional responses, tragic opera seems the ideal way to help humans understand the global tragedy before us. When this work is installed, people can observe the living environment and large live images projected onto the wall of the installation to reveal this micro-world at a scale equivalent to our own. These videos are mixed with videos of industrial farming, pesticide use, and other industrial processes decimating insects globally. This work invites us to notice the subtlety and the beauty of all insects, as well as ancient isopods. As isopods have survived multiple global extinction events, they are the ideal musical activators of this tragic opera. With this biorobotic installation, we may also realize that a catastrophic collapse of nature's ecosystems will mean unprecedented human hunger and perhaps our own extinction.
The enteric consciousness is a large robotic tongue controlled by an artificial stomach. This artificial stomach is filled with the same living bacteria, Lactobacillus acidophilus, that occupy our own natural stomachs. Our stomachs and intestinal systems are called the enteric nervous system and are certainly seen as forms of intelligence, as they possess 1/1000th of the numbers of neurons in the human brain and use many of the same neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and epinephrine. If the hand and finger can be seen as extensions of our human brain, then the tongue can be thought of as an extension of the enteric nervous system, seeking out what it prefers to ingest. In this installation, an artificial stomach will allow the bacteria within it to activate a functioning robotic chair in the shape of a giant tongue. This giant tongue is designed to give you a comforting massage. The robotic chair is covered with a red emu leather that gives the appearance of swollen taste buds of an enlarged and hungry tongue. I have chosen in this work to focus on our sense of touch and corporeal experience as a way to explore interactivity, as our largest sense organ is in fact our skin. As peristaltic muscle movements propel food and bacteria through our natural stomachs, so an electronic peristaltic pump will artificially replicate these movements as it moves cooling water through the artificial glass stomach. A pH meter will constantly measure the acidity and basicity of the bacteria, and these signals are interfaced to and activate a series of relays and microcontrollers that allow the robotic tongue chair to activate, relax, and massage the viewer interactant. Acid-loving milk bacterium, Lactobacillus acidophilus, are the activators of this robotic tongue. Another important element of this installation are two smaller robotic tongues that dip into and out of chocolate pools located in large glass containers. The containers are held up by large dopamine molecules constructed in steel. The dopamine molecule is believed to mediate the subjective experience of pleasure in humans and other animals. Sugar and fat are two substances that both the tongue and the stomach desire. Research has proven that chocolate can boost serotonin, and it can also stimulate secretions of endorphins. This work is mostly inspired by the notion of the conscious stomach, though it is also inspired by the ideas that humans are not individuals so much as clouds of intertwined human, bacterial, and now machine cells. We have evolved into hybrid symbiotic ecosystems that consist of trillions of living bacteria.
Hello, I'm Amy Youngs. Science has taught us that our perceptual abilities are lacking. Butterflies can see colors that we cannot. Dogs have superior olfactory senses, and plants can sense the presence of other plants. And yet, we still operate on the assumption that we humans are exceptional. The negative effects of techno-industrial humans on Earth have become visible, ironically, through our imaging and data technologies, and knowable to us through increasing global weather uncertainty, plus now a global pandemic. Still, we have proudly named an epoch after ourselves, the Anthropocene. The anthropocentric worldview that cultured me is no longer working for me or for our species, and as an artist, I'm working to imagine, feel, enact, and share alternatives. I aspire to live in an ecocentric future where humans learn from non-humans and form multi-species kinship networks. This is a future where humans feel and act like a part of the ecosystem as we are, rather than imagining that we're above it. It is important for our survival. What does this kind of future look and feel like, and how do we begin? I've received guidance from many non-humans. I've kept the same colony of composting worms for over 25 years. They have led me towards ecocentric viewpoints. Living with worms has changed the way I consume, make art, and think about myself in relation to non-humans. In this time-lapse video, my worm bin webcam shows the transformation of waste into fertilizer. This perspective reveals the awesome efficiency of these soil organisms and reminds me that human life depends on them. I'm not obsessed with worms in particular, but I am obsessed with systems and transformations and the ability to see, sense, and know them in an embodied, situated way. Worms have also introduced me to their active symbiotic community, which includes springtails, isopods, bacteria, and fungi. The fact that humans are entangled with and totally reliant upon a multi-species world is clear. Food, oxygen, and waste processing comes from our non-human kin. However, this fact becomes abstracted in a culture where food appears magically in grocery stores and waste disappears magically into trash bins. In this handshake with composting worms, I wanted to feel myself inside an ecosystem. A handshake is a ritual of greeting, an acknowledgement of equality, a sealing of an agreement, and a demonstration of respect. I held the worms in my hand and felt the gentle movement of their fleshy, moist bodies, fed by waste generated from my own household. There are many visible ways in which worms enrich my life. Each year when the orchids bloom, I see the generative power of worm tea, the juice that provides them fertilizer. And when I bite into a juicy tomato from my small garden, I know I'm eating nutrients recycled from tossed tea bags, cardboard, rabbit dung, banana peels, which have all traveled through the bodies of worms. Wishing to share these experiences with others, I've made systems-based artworks. In Digestive Table, people can eat with composting worms who live in the fabric bag under the table. They can feed leftover worm food to the worms and watch them on an infrared surveillance camera built into the table. Rich compost is harvested from the bottom of the bag and it can be fed to the plants. I believe everyone should cohabitate with worms as they remind us of the importance of nutrient cycling and the nearly invisible laborers who do this. When we put food waste into landfills, this degrades into one of the largest sources of methane gas emission. Keeping worms means you're keeping this greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. The ways in which red wiggler worms can live with us in domestic spaces is far more expansive than you might think. Worms don't drown in water. In fact, they thrive in hydroponic-like ecosystems. Instead of using petroleum-based fertilizers, as in traditional hydroponics, this recirculating system is powered by food waste, worms, and bacteria. Water is pumped up to the top of the rainbow every hour, and it trickles down through each container, reaching the bottom worm bins, which are like pots of gold at the end of the rainbow covered in wheatgrass. The worm's activities circulate the nutrients through the water in the system. After years of trying to give away worms to all of my friends, I understand that not everyone is willing to take on worms as teachers. So I have sought out other art-making methods to help guide people's attention. Like any practice, the practice of attentiveness to non-human worlds is easier with guides. Our attention is already supersaturated. What reminds us to attend to soil or air or water? How do we develop emotional loyalty to this earthly stuff? What about those living creatures that process, move, make, and remake it? Perhaps wetlands, plants, and fungi need their own corporate brands to keep us loyal to them. Paying attention to the non-humans reminds us they're an important part of our community. We're kin, but it is easy to forget this when we don't experience them or interact with them on a regular basis. In their essays on multi-species cities, Thomas Van Doren and Deborah Bird Rose argue for, quote, an ethics of conviviality that is urban-based, emplaced, embodied, and enlivened through multiple stories enacted and expressed by multiple species. Places are materialized as historical and meaningful, and no place is produced by a singular vision of how it is or might be. In short, places are co-constituted in processes of overlapping and entangled storying, in which different participants may have very different ideas about where we have come from and where we are going, unquote. With a desire to be attentive to the entangled multi-species stories of a place, I did a residency at Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York, which resulted in 2 experiential artworks designed to focus attention on the non-humans there by engaging the bodies of the human participants.
Flushing Meadows Corona Park is a freshwater wetland in New York City, whose history includes layers of trash dumping, landfilling, water re-engineering, and paving to accommodate 2 World's Fairs. Resting upon anthropogenic soil and ringed by auto expressways that add harmful effluents, this area around Willow Lake is undergoing restoration. A variety of birds, insects, fungi, and plants live in this public park. Many of the species, such as Phragmites, are called invasive as they thrive due to the conditions fostered by human and machinic activities. After traveling to the site, I could see the effects of my own actions on the place as I saw the shimmering petroleum floating on the water. Creatures move through it anyway, like me, filtering it through our porous bodies. Grasping Permeability is a virtual reality installation that invites viewers to interact with images by grasping them with the controllers in hand. This spatial simulation is made from photographs I took on site. The experience is designed to alter the viewer's sense of self in relation to the hollow virtual skins, the surface representations of place. The ring of Phragmites plants provide a semi-permeable layer that can be touched by real and virtual hands.
The next project attempts to get the participants' attention focused on the storied worlds of non-humans once they're there on site. I created an app which functions similarly to a museum guide, except that it guides you as if you were a creature of the place, such as a tree, a muskrat, bird, or mushroom. The app leads you to enact stories of symbiotic entanglements taking place there. This is an augmented reality artwork that encourages people to explore and experience ecological networks present in Flushing Meadows Corona Park. The art app includes mixed reality animations and storytelling as an overlay to the actual park. The experience is an embodied one, designed to connect humans with the unseen world present in the park. Instead of inventing a fantasy story, it was important to me that it be rooted in the reality of the place. It is an eco-narrative based on firsthand knowledge of who is present on the site, scientific knowledge of them, and ecological knowledge of their interactions. The human is woven into a part of the network of lively creatures who share symbiotic associations. It is timed so that you land at a stopping point on the trail that relates to the creature that you've become. When you're the cormorant, you're at the lake, diving underwater, chasing the fish, which you see animated on your screen. The menu is a map that shows you where each augmented reality scene takes place. You begin as a plant immersed in your world of chemical communications.
There are chemical messages being sent out from our neighbors. These emissions are swirling around and moving into the airspace. Plants may not be able to walk, but we can move beyond our plant body and control the creatures that move around us. Float ahead to where the path splits off. Look for birds. We are transforming into a yellow warbler, a bird that navigates all the way from Central America each spring to nest in this park. How do we do it? We can see magnetic fields. There are chemical...
Indeed, recent research shows that migrating birds can see magnetic fields, almost like a heads-up display, which is what augmented reality does for humans. We can't see magnetic fields, but the sensors in our phones can, so we can have the augmented bird view of the world simulated for us in our handheld devices. It is a bird world view overlaid onto our own, helping us augment our human reality.
When the pink trail appears on the ground ahead, tap it to lay down scent pheromones that will refresh the trail, so the ants coming along later will know that it is still a good one. Take a few steps ahead, then stop and tap again, then again. We want to be sure this trail is here for as long as this food source is, so we can go back for more. After tapping a few pheromones onto the ground, stop and look behind to see if they are there. Use the connection device like an antenna to read the trail we have written. Let's stow the device now and use our sensors to follow the trail ahead. We walk with our 6 super-coordinated legs, able to speed.
At the end of each scene, users are instructed to put their phones away and pay attention, which is, ironically, the whole point of the app. My hope is that this type of embodied, multi-species, story-living experience will begin to tune our attention to the expansive, more than human world that we live within. The app is available for free on the Android and Apple app stores. I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators and supporters who helped make this project possible. Thank you.
You're still muted.
There you go, unmute. Thanks, guys. Hi, everybody. Wow, what beautiful work. I just cannot thank you guys enough for being here and for presenting. That's just gorgeous, gorgeous work. So I think I'm the moderator. Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Desmarais, and I'm going to introduce the amazing people on the panel today. Our first presenter, our first video is Carlos Castellanos. Carlos is an assistant professor at the School of Interactive Games and Media at RIT. Carlos, thank you so much for participating. And then it was my video. And then our next presenter after me was Ken Ronaldo. Ken is a professor of art in the Department of Art at The Ohio State University. Ken, thank you so much for participating today. And our last presenter is Amy Youngs. Amy is an associate professor of art in the Department of Art at The Ohio State University. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm going to kick off our discussion asking our panel. I have a lot of questions. You guys can tell I'm really excited to have these guys here because I have questions for individual questions for you and group questions for you. But I'm curious to know what kinds of questions you guys have for us on the panel. And we're also going to be looking at the questions that are going to be coming in from everyone who is virtually assembled with us today. So anybody have any questions for us on the panel? Any of you guys want me to start? I have a number, you guys. I would really like to talk about I'd like to talk about motivation, I'd like to talk about process, and I'd like to talk about what you find. One of the things that I think one of the things that is occurring to me is that artists who work in these kinds of areas, that we actually are doing many kinds of should I say, ecosystem services for lots of different areas. We're doing work for artists. We are doing work that supports scientists. We're doing work that supports the big wide world. We're doing work that supports the non-human. I don't necessarily know, though, if that's actually our motivation. And I suspect that each of you has different reasons that you do the work that you do. I'm really curious what that is. I mean, in a science context, it's sort of a given that a scientist is doing their research because they're creating factual knowledge. But us artists, it may be a different orientation. So I'm going to ask each of you guys, what's your motivation? I'm going to go and sort of in our order. I'm going to start with Carlos, and then I'm going to go to Ken, and then I'm going to go to Amy. Carlos, are you willing? Are you willing to take on that question?
Yes, I will. I will try. I think. I mean, as you sort of alluded to, in the engineering and scientific fields, there's pretty sort of well-defined methods and sort of ideas of what a contribution to knowledge is, right? So I'm speaking broadly here. I think everyone on this panel certainly is doing that, right? Contributing to knowledge, and through different means than what we normally associate with that, right? So I think by creating unconventional combinations of different materials or different, whatever mediums or materials, we can at least strive to achieve new ways of looking at the world. And in the context of this panel, how sort of the human and the non-human world how we can better, I use a term for my project, sort of a window through the otherness of the non-human world, right? And how can we do that, right? So what can emerge is, a new understanding of concepts like ecology or emergence or intelligence or complexity. And, I think certainly the artists here, articulate those things in a very unique and engaging way through the lens of aesthetic, artistic experience, right? But I think, knowledge has to be formalized, right? But even without a strict formalization, I think it could be recognized that there's at least a step towards a contribution to knowledge. So that's one way of looking at it, as far as like what motivation is, to contribute to knowledge, just like scientists.
I can't hear you.
So sorry, I keep forgetting to unmic. Ken, would you like to field that question?
Yes, thank you. So my motivations, I think, are really motivations of discovery, about who and what I am, and about who and what we are as a species. And so I'm very interested in this idea of sentience, but I don't really see myself as an individual as much as I see myself as trillions of cells working, simultaneously to create this thing we call cognition. So in some of my works, let's say the Entera consciousness, for example, I'm really interested in this sort of mediated space that occurs between the bacteria that are communicating through my vagus nerve into my brain directly, into many of my organs. So that fascinates me. To me, that's a kind of beautiful trans-species communication that is very much a part of who I am as an individual. But in fact, I'm not an individual. I'm trillions of bacterial cells. I'm trillions of human cells that have been invaded 3.4 billion years ago in the case of mitochondria, with Lynn Margulis's idea of symbiogenesis. I think my motivations often are about decentering this idea that humans are the only way we see and understand the world, because I've never really believed that. I think science does the same thing. Science to me is just a lens with particular kinds of amplifications. And I see that a lot of my motivations with my own work is to make the invisible visible, to show cultures of care, to show that sometimes the very small or the things that we would normally dismiss have a very strong sense of agency themselves. And I, just want to reflect how much I agree with some of the questions that you asked earlier, Elizabeth, about creating works in a sense that are sensitive to a being, or works that provide some sense of agency. And so a lot of my motivations also are to give voice to the unheard, to make those things somehow visible to humans, which, we think of ourselves as so extraordinary, but in fact, again, I think of ourselves as a big pond of trillions of cells.
Oh, lovely. Lovely. Amy, would you like to field that question?
Thanks. Yes. I think for me, the motivation is just super curiosity about other living things, and about technology, and about how those two things coming together cause new assemblages and new possible ways of thinking about ourselves. And like a big question for me early on as an artist was like, what is technology doing? Is it actually making us more anthropocentric or less anthropocentric? And I look at this panel and I say, it's totally making us less anthropocentric. But then I look at the world and I say, no, technology has done so much damage in terms of making us feel superior. And I think that struggle about what is possible with technology and living things and what is actually being done is my motivation. And so I send this question back to you. I want to hear from you next.
Oh boy, well, that's interesting because what is possible with technology? I actually wrote that down during especially the last interactive, that last interactive piece. Where you're carrying your phone around, and yeah. So we'll get to that. On the question of motivation, you guys, I'm seeing something. I mean, I keep parsing this. It's really tough. Right, we're in the middle of, as Ken, we're looking at a massive species die-off. We're looking at insects. We're looking at, we're looking at the massive species die-off if we continue with our current rate of ecological destruction. And by the end of this century, 50% of every life form. This is E.O. Wilson, but 50% of every life form may be gone. Right, by the end of the century. And it's extraordinary and it's humbling. And so I think that a lot of us that are sort of working in these spaces, there's a lot of demand on what we're doing. There's a lot of demand. I mean, Amy, your table is just, it's just fabulous. I love the idea of just, I can't wait to, my 11-year-old is going to love to just push all the food scraps right into the middle of the table and let it fall through and make soil for everyone. There's a good reason to do that. Right? There's a good reason to design systems that function like that. And yet I suspect that the reason you're doing that is because of a poetic urge, not because you're dying to make maybe you are dying to make a system so that we can all turn our food scraps immediately into soil. There's a good reason for that. You don't make methane when you do small amounts of composting. It's a brilliant way to get everybody to do that in our own little individual homes. But I suspect that the reason that you're doing it is because you're poetically motivated. And that's something that I've been looking at. Like the reason that I do these crazy things, it's a poetic desire. It's not because, I want to make the world a better place. Definitely it wasn't because I wanted to make the world a better place when I started. Maybe I'm trying to a little more now than I was when I was, in graduate school or something like that. I keep though thinking about, there's a great statement. It's by Sol LeWitt. It's from his 25 sentences on conceptual art. And in those sentences, in number 2, he says, rational judgments lead to rational experience, but irrational judgments lead to new experience. And I think of it this way, like those poetic desires, they are irrational. Like I think that that's like this ingredient that artists bring to the table, and that maybe it's just my own. Maybe I'm here in my fishbowl. This is like my motivation is I've got these weird reasons for wanting to do stuff, and they're poetic. They're not necessarily about saving the world, but they might be about communicating or paying attention to ants. So I just kind of feel like that's that extra sort of, maybe that's the weirdo thing that, that some of us are bringing, and I suspect everybody on this panel is bringing to the table. So I don't know, that's my answer to that question. So I have a bunch of other questions, but Carlos, you actually signed in properly. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Is it just us? Because it can.
Yes, no, there's a few questions. Let me I guess I should go backwards. Hang on. There's a first one from Philippe Vandal. How to avoid technophilic, or the good Anthropocene approach to these new collaborations with the more than human world.
Okay, could you do that slowly? The beginning of the question.
Sure. How to avoid? I think it's saying how can we avoid technofixing or technophilic, or the good Anthropocene approach to these new collaborations with the more than human world.
My first question is the gentleman's name is Philippe. What does he mean by good Anthropocene approach? Could he clarify, please?
Needs a little explanation, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hold on.
Well, I mean, if rephrase the question, is maybe he's asking like how is what we're doing merely just another technofix, right? That technology can save us, right?
Okay, so this is interesting because I wrote this down right during Amy's presentation. And it's a really interesting question. And here we are at the International Symposium of Electronic Arts. So let's just jump right in. Technology, right? Technology. It does, it is multifaceted. It works in many different directions and for many different purposes and reasons. Why don't we each tackle technology? Carlos, you want to start?
You want me to define technology?
All right, I'm going to turn my microphone off, and I'm prepared to be entertained.
I mean, let me just sort of step back and just say, everyone, with regards to motivation, we're all sort of saying the same thing, in different ways, and you guys said it very beautifully, and very much, I think, what scientists would say. So about their motivations. So if I try to transition or pivot to defining technology, one, I mean, obviously we can give examples, but it's I think for us humans, it's our way of extending our senses and our way of feeling part of the world, the trillions of cells, right, like Ken said, whether that's actually true with the actual technology we have, we could certainly discuss, but I think that's the perhaps the more sort of embodied sense of why we make technology. I don't know, that's my stab at it.
I guess I'll take a stab at it. Thank you very much for the excellent question. And I just see the technology as a way to amplify, not unlike what I see from this group, what already exists in the natural world. But I think, like many of us, I have a very dark sense of technology and technology's ability to damage the planet. I feel very strongly that natural living systems have already provided this beautiful model of intertwined ecosystems. And, I think we see that exemplified, let's say, in Amy's work, where she's taking food waste, which is itself a part of industrial agriculture, but she's breaking it down and stopping it from entering, the waste stream of methane producing gases. In my own practice, I most recently have been thinking that I have to stop using so much plastic. I have to recycle. I have to find ways of, finding materials that degrade. And in a way, I think that these are interesting questions because so often in the realm of art, especially when we're thinking about collectability, we want something that will last because we all believe somehow it's going to become a famous work of art someday. But, I have to admit, I enjoy this idea that a work can have a limited lifespan. And when it's done, it becomes part of the earth again. And, so those are, I think, for me, those are ways to answer those questions. But I think that it's a great question because I think we have to be very, very careful not to always be looking for the latest technologies and spending, the Amazon dollars to try to show the latest feature of something. I think we have to find better ways of understanding the natural world as a model for what the technological world can become. And that's really why I think some of the reasons I study natural living systems and see them as a model. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess I really was going off of that idea that Carlos was saying, that technology is like extending our senses. And I think, that's where I was with like the handshake piece I was showing. Like, I think of technology as a handshake with these other things in the world. And that handshake isn't really even saying like, I'm equal to you. It's saying, I need to know more about you. And I think that that these technologies that we're using are really just a way for us to get to know what we don't yet know. So I think like then we learn through our technologies that there's all of these things that we didn't know about. This idea that the world is bigger than what we know is like we can peek in there with this extended sense of technology. And then hopefully, like my idea is that hopefully then we go, wow, we have a lot more to learn and we are now more humble. But I guess, my question is, and this is sort of the techno-fix problem, is like, why aren't we more humble now that science and technology has taught us how much we don't know? Like, why? Like, that's baffling to me. I'm missing something, I think.
Why aren't we more humble? I don't know if I can do that one. Boy, I wrote so many things down just now in all of your guys' comments. I'm with Ken. I used to really think that technologies we as a species, we're just not wise enough. I think I forget who said this, but anthropologists said that one of the things about Western culture is that we confuse knowledge for wisdom, and we confuse power for strength, right? And so, like to your comment, Amy, you'd think we would, you'd think we'd like, oh my God, it's a genome. This is amazing. Here we've got this pattern for everything, and we're connected to flatworms, and we're connected to, octopi, and this is amazing. But no, what happens is we go, ooh, let's genetically modify, let's give everyone, let's make everyone 8 feet tall and give everyone, I don't know, purple freckles or whatever is the latest trend that us humans think are, is beautiful. Something though is occurring to me, and it's kind of weird that we're sort of at this moment where we're kind of desperate. I mean, we really are, in terms of our planet, in terms of our moment, we're kind of desperate. We're really beginning to recognize how much we actually have to depend on the non-human for everything. Climate scientists say all we have to do, every human being on Earth, if we could plant 6 trees, if all of us, I'm trying to get my fingers if we could just plant 6 trees, we wouldn't have a problem with global warming. right? That, you know, trees, right? The ability to photosynthesize is just beyond me. I mean, the ability to take, you know, to take energy from the sun and create chemical energy with it. Or in the case of fungi, you know, to even use radiation to create chemical energy is extraordinary. And I kind of feel like we're just getting to this moment now where we're beginning to recognize that natural ecosystems have created these life forms that have abilities that we have no idea about. I mean, that's the thing I'm finding with this floraboard project. We have no idea about the kind of sensing that plants can do. And it's extraordinary. And no one studied it. You know, it's just baffling to me that at this moment where we are suddenly realizing we are so dependent on everything else that we've suddenly had these technologies to understand stuff. And I feel like we're just playing catch up. And so from this weird point of view, I've almost become sort of, you know, I'm like pro-technology catch-up in a weird sort of way. And it's a very strange kind of paradigm shift for me personally as a maker and an artist to be going through this moment. So I don't know, that's all I really want to say about technology. Carlos, anything else in the feed, or do I get to go to my list?
No, maybe, I mean, I don't think we were able to get through all the questions, but
Okay.
the next question, sort of just to bounce off of exactly what you were saying, I won't read the whole question, it's kind of long. This is from Sofiane Audrey. I'll just read the last part. Is considering the speed at which the destruction of the planet is operating, can we even hope that people can change their views and start acting differently in time? So is what we're doing making a difference, I guess, is what he's asking, right? Because he says, you know, drastic changes, and that's, you know, we know all this, and you just explained how we're sort of playing catch up. So
I feel like he just asked it like the kind of like the why is there evil in the world question.
Yes.
That's like one of those, like, you know, that's like one of those, that's like that big ticket, you know, wouldn't it be great if we knew the answer to that? All right, Carlos, you want to take it?
I mean, realistically, can we even hope? Yes, we can hope. You know, that's it. I mean, no, I think we're headed for really serious, you know, reckoning, you know. So I'll just leave it there, and I'm sure Ken and Amy can address it more beautifully.
One of the things that occurred to me as I was watching so many wonderful presentations today was this idea of remediation, but especially what I would call ideational remediation. And in a way, I see so many of these works of art as ideas that help to communicate about our intertwined relationship to the natural worlds. The fact that the technology allows us to amplify those worlds and make it visible to others, to me, is the power of the technology. But the fact that the world is pretty much based on the manufacture and supply chains of a kind of extractivist behavior, like, oh, we're going to grab oil and we're going to make plastic. And I think we need completely new models. And I know, Elizabeth, for example, you had that wonderful piece called Plastomac, which was about eating plastics and looking for natural solutions. And I think we need new forms of the Environmental Protection Agency. That would be obvious, especially in the United States, where our brilliant president has been, you know, deconstructing any environmental controls. But I think we need to look at the complexity of living systems and the intertwined nature of all those things. And we know Roundup Ready causes cancer, and yet we still cannot seem to convince people that that's a dangerous product for them and their children. So I think that, to me, we need more of these ideational remediations. We need more of all of your work and the other people that I see at this conference as well, to create new models for our society, which are based on remediation and reuse and things that degrade. I mean, Carlos, you talked a little bit earlier about, for example, slime molds. Slime molds can solve complex ways of understanding, you know, let's say routing streets or you know, and in a way, a lot of people are looking at ways of doing computing, for example, with bacteria. So to me, those are where we need to focus. It's like, how can we create a technology by its very nature, which is biodegradable at the end, and how do we continue to amplify these ideational remediations that I see from this group?
Yeah, maybe if we just make slime mold computers, things will start to get better. I mean, seriously. Right?
Yeah.
Or maybe if we had some slime mold on the panel, we could just kick the question. Okay, hey Amy, what's your thought?
Well, I just love the idea of the ideational remediation, and I just want to like kind of go with that, and then think about ways of generating hopeful futures. And I think that, you know, like I just invented an assignment for my students. You know, many of us are teachers. Are thinking about how, not just as artists, but as people in the world, how do we do that work of having hope and do the work of imagining what those new ways of interacting with the living world would be, and like forcing my students to do projects like that too. Like no, you're not allowed to make an apocalyptic future. We've already seen those. Like, let's see something different for a change. So I think, you know, I throw that out to everybody. Like, let's all make that hopeful thing happen.
Yeah. I just wrote down, let's all make that hopeful thing happen. So I just want to address this for a minute, because there is something here, and this is something that I've been going through with my students, and I'd love to talk about plastic, but I won't. I mean, Kim was talking about this thing called the plastomatch, which is a big sculptural stomach that eats plastic by virtue of living fungi. Everyone, white rot fungi can eat the carbon chains in plastic in the same way it can eat wood, and we made an open source design. You can make these things, you can put them in your, you know, over your garbage. If you're willing to wash your plastic very, very well and cut it up into tiny pieces, you can potentially feed it to this life form, but then you have to be careful with what you do with it. They're hyperaccumulators. But anyway, I just want to hop back to just a second to this idea of humans and the idea of changing behavior. There's a really great organization called ISEA, ACE, Association of Environmental Science Studies. You guys, I just want to kick that out there. They're really dedicated to connecting hard sciences with the humanities. And what it really is it's a whole bunch of environmental scientists who are beside themselves, because the environmental scientists know what's going on. They're studying the climate. They are horrified, and they are trying to reach out to other areas, desperately trying to figure out how to spread information out into the world so that people pay attention to it. And they're really willing to work with artists. So I'm on the artist committee over there. They gave me a fancy award show when they did the Anthropocene show in 2016. We've been putting artists on all the panels. Why do I say this? Because one of the most powerful ways of changing behavior, you know, human behavior, like you don't have to build giant buildings to do it. You don't have to come up with new technologies. All you have to do is change the way that we function, right? If you could get every human to use Amy's table, amazing. Imagine the methane that we could pull out of the air. Well, the easiest way to change a behavior, cognitive psychologists tell us, is to connect it to a ritual. If you can connect things to a ritual, and you can get us humans to do it as a ritual, like, oh, you know, it's Earth Day, time to go make some seed balls, which is a project that I've been doing with my students. You know, like, ooh, Earth Day, we're going to make seed balls instead of Easter eggs and give them to each other, indigenous species. If you can get us humans to do that, maybe it's ritualized plastic cleaning. Maybe it's, I've been trying to figure out how to get people to wrap Christmas presents in trash. We're doing a big trash wrap in Chelsea. You know, if you can connect it to rituals, then you have a shot at actually changing our behavior. And I just want to kick that to everyone. I think that we really need to think about how to do that. And us artists, we're really good. We can use the discursive capital of art to push these things into the world. And by the way, when you get people to do their own designs and to participate in these kinds of actions, they become hopeful. I mean, that's, you know, when when you're a maker and when you're a doer, you're participating in our future. So I don't know, that's just my 2-bit my 2 cents on human behavior and change. Carlos, anything else in the feed right now?
Yes, let's see. Like I said, we won't have time to get through all of the questions, but I'm trying to go more or less in order that they were asked.
So fast question, you guys. Our panel goes until when?
I think we have 5 minutes.
5
so
minutes.
1:30.
Oh, okay. So listen, no.
So this might be the
no.
what?
No. We're not going to do a feed. I want to conclude. I've got a question to conclude with.
Okay.
How did I conclude with the question? All right. So you guys, this is about your process. Once again, back to your process, because I am trying to figure this stuff out as well. I'm really interested in what it is that you think that what it is that from your own work, what is it that you find that you're finding from your own work that you don't think might be found through a scientific method? Carlos, I'm so sorry that you're on the top of the screen. Could we start with you? And we all have
Sure.
about a minute and a half. I don't know if it's a hard close, if they're going to pull our plug or not. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all, as we mentioned, sort of, fascinated by, in my case right now, I'm looking at pattern forming bacteria, but, there's many, or slime mold, we're all fascinated by all these different kinds of things. So how does the process differ? I mean, our process goes sort of beyond the constraints of the particular discipline, right? If we're just talking about the process. So, I mean, I didn't have much time to go into it, but that project we're working on with the pattern forming bacteria, where I'll just say those bacteria form their patterns, you essentially have to starve them for them to make those beautiful patterns. So that's sort of the hook, right? Like they have to look beautiful for the AI, or and they have to be starved essentially to do that. And then the more beautiful they look, the more they remediate a contaminated soil ecology. Okay, so we're already beyond the constraints of the discipline, right? Because you're mishmashing these things together, like the status and implications of AI, sort of ecological issues, and notions of sort of bacterial intelligence and all that stuff. So the best way I could put it is just simply sort of asking questions and doing non-rational. In my case, like creating, I guess you could say, a non-rational system. Like it doesn't really specifically answer a scientific question, right? And that's not the point. So yeah, creating non-rational systems, I guess.
Beautiful. Ken, how about you?
In my process, I'm really interested in corporeal issues, in particular, what I would call the kind of beautiful quality of materiality. I'm really interested in materiality. But how do I see this differing from scientific, inquiry? I see the kind of questions artists asking as perhaps being a little bit different than some of the kind of questions that scientists are often asking. I see scientists often asking very specific questions about particular kinds of research agendas. And as an artist, I see my task maybe as being a unifier and looking for underlying relationships between things, in a sense. Like maybe it's the ecosystem of ideas. So I'm really interested in materiality in particular, the language of material, but especially asking questions. I don't think I need to answer them, but I feel that the questions I'm asking are sometimes quite different. Not unlike what I see in all of this, the panel's works, like the care for an ant in a center medium. It's preposterous and wonderful. I love it. So.
Amy.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to pick up on that word friendship and idiosyncrasies that was brought up by Elizabeth, which is something that I also feel with the kinds of the works that I do. That's something that's generated in the work. And I don't think that's something that scientists get to really deal with much in their research, but it's something that connects all of us, connects all humans to each other and to non-humans. So it seems like, yeah, it's not very scientific, but it's very important. Friendship and relationships and entanglement. So I think that those are the things that that I hope my work does.
Oh, wow, that was, so listen, you guys, I talked about that in my little thing, in my little talk, so I'm not going to answer that again. But I really want to thank all of you. That was just absolutely beautiful. I don't know about our audience, but it was deeply edifying for me. So I can't thank you enough. And I'm really glad that this is recorded, because it's going to give me a chance to go back and re-listen to all of your guys' talks. I just think it's just really extraordinary, and I'm just enormously grateful that you were all willing to come and visit with us today and share your work and your process. So I want to big jazz hands, big jazz, yeah, jazz hands for jazz, there you go, jazz hands for everybody. Clap. Really, really superb job, you all, and it's now 1:30. So yeah, we actually
thank you also to ISEA. You guys are techno wizards.
Oh my God, I know.
Oh my goodness, how did you do it?
Amazing. So let's
thanks for all the questions. Sorry we didn't get into all the questions.